Welcome to another episode of Two Drink Maximum. I'm your host, Shane Byerly.
I'm your other host, Chase.
Good to have you here, Chase.
Good to be here.
We are excited. We have got a very special guest here that we will not be naming.
That's right. It's a mystery guest this evening.
He is an anonymous person, or he's asked to remain anonymous as to protect the names of the innocent.
Potentially international man of mystery.
And potentially international man of mystery. But we are very excited to have our anonymous guest. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it.
Yes.
So we'll get into what you do or what you did and why you're here. But as we like to start the show, tell us, what are we drinking this evening?
All right, so this is coffee with hazelnut cream.
Very good.
Easy.
Easy peasy. Yes, a pretty standard drink I think most folks
And
are familiar
delicious.
with.
It has
And
it has a lot of meaning.
Exactly, it does. Well, first, let's take a sip. Cheers, everybody.
Let's cheers our coffee.
Ooh, mine is still very hot, by the way. So
It is
yeah,
as
slow sips,
coffee
yeah.
should be always. Should always be very, very warm.
So, why are we drinking coffee?
Okay, so when I worked almost 20 years ago as a medic and a firefighter for the city, not this city that we're in, but a different city, coffee really kept us going most of the night. So to me, if it was a drink that had to hark back to those types of nights, it would be this coffee in front of me.
A lot of flavor memory tied to coffee for you.
Yes, brings back those memories. It surely does.
As gasoline is fuel for cars, coffee is fuel for medics, I imagine. So drinking this coffee in the evening, I'm sure is bringing it back.
Yeah,
so.
night shift, day shift, coffee is king. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you would detail what specifically you did, if you would.
Yeah, so I worked as I'll start it off.
Yeah.
I worked as a firefighter. It was a volunteer firefighter company that we were in. The city really needed some help, and I volunteered there. They put us through the fire training academy. After the fire training academy, I started working as a firefighter. The city found, and this was at the time too, that as defibrillation and defibrillators were really popular devices, they were showing that early defibrillation saves lives. And that was something that the city was really working hard to have earlier response times for medical emergencies.
Okay.
And so they would go to the fire department and say, okay, can we have you all be a first responder to medical calls? And that was something that we really didn't roll much on. And so to do that, they had to have a firefighter that would operate during a call like that who was an EMT. And so the department put money aside to have people go through EMT school, and they would pay for it all. So I decided to take that opportunity, and I became an EMT. And so I was working on the flying squad, and we would be responding to all the medical emergencies. So not only did we respond to all the fire emergencies, but we also responded to the medical calls. And those medical calls are what really opened up my eyes to the world of EMS. And so then as an EMT, I got hired for the city working for an ambulance company. And then I was doing the 911 calls that we would then see firefighters that we would work with.
That you knew,
and I
right?
knew, right?
Yeah.
That I knew through the company. And that is how I got in as a firefighter and a medic.
Wow. Well, let's back up a little bit, because being a firefighter is not a job like an accountant or a lawyer that I think a lot of people just go, oh, I want to do that, right? It takes a very specific breed of person to want to do that. What was that process for you, kind of making that decision of like, I want to do this, I think I can do this? Because there's obviously a very serious element of danger with that. Like, what was that process for you deciding that I want to do this as a job?
Yeah, I think that I get that question a lot, because people kind of look at firefighters, EMS, and police as kind of crazy people, running into the emergency while everyone's running away.
Yeah,
right.
like
and the people over the years who have asked me, or have said to me that I'm interested in being a medic, or I'm thinking about it. What do you think? Do you think that it's something that I would do well in? And my responses have always been pretty much the same, that if it's in your blood, you know it. You don't even have to ask the question. If you're asking that question, you probably really do need to think twice about it, because it takes a certain type of breed of people. I think it takes the mentality that comes with that. It's in your blood. It's really hard to say, but everybody that we know, that I've known over those years, were very much the same. You were the first in, you were the first out. You were rushing to get there, and we certainly weren't hoping that bad calls would come, but we were hoping that when the bad calls came, we were ready to respond. Sure. We enjoyed being available to do the job, and I think that is the type of personality that you see a lot with EMS, fire, and police.
Sure. So you sign up to be fire, right? And then the opportunity arises for EMT training. What was that thought process of, okay, so fire is cool, but this seems like it could be, more interesting or.
Yeah, at the time I was really thinking about going into medical school. It was an idea that I'd been fascinated with medicine, science and medicine. I was really interested in, and that was at a time in my life where I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I'd felt like there were doors that I could open by going to school and through education, and then there were other doors that could open through experience. And so when I joined the fire department, not only was there a need in the city, but it gave me exposure to the medical side of it, because I would see the EMS as they were coming. Because oftentimes, by the way, before we started responding on medical calls, fire department would roll on some medical calls if they needed assistance. So like lifting assistance, things like that, extrication. So we would work together with EMS, but we wouldn't really respond very much or often to medical calls like shortness of breath, chest pain, things like that. We that were purely medical and not trauma. We would not typically respond. But now that we had an EMT on the units and everybody was getting certified over time, and they wanted to have at least, so the city required that at least one was an EMT, and over time more people became EMTs, and then I think almost everybody, except for a lot of the old timers, almost everybody who was new in was an EMT. By that point. But in the fire training academy, they really didn't talk about that with medicine and medical work. It was like first responder if we had a first responding call. But most of that was trauma at that kind of level. But the fire training academy definitely opened my eyes to that. There's so much more to do with with fire and medical. So I think that for me, it gave me a wide range of perspectives as to what I could do with my career if I wanted to go into medicine, or maybe I wanted to go into something that was completely outside of the emergency field, like in a major in business or law or something like that.
Yeah, I could imagine that also the possibility of just you're literally making split-second decisions, right, as an EMT. So that gives you the know-how of I can do this, with something that's literally less life-threatening, like business or whatever.
Right.
What was harder for you, physically or mentally? Was it fire training school or was it the EMT training? What was longer?
Yeah, physically the fire training academy was the hardest.
Sure.
But mentally, I think that the EMT school was more, because a lot of it is learning out of a book, right? And I wouldn't say that I wasn't that good at learning out of a book. I would say that it was just not where my mind mentally at the time wanted to be. I really wanted to be out there responding to calls. I would keep my pager with me, and I would sometimes hear the calls coming out while I'm in class, and I'm like, oh man, I'm missing a good call. And it's not because I want, like I said, I want to preface that with, like, we don't want bad calls to happen. We just want to be the one who responds to those bad calls, because we know that each of us can contribute and can do well, and feel like each of us can make a difference, and we want to be that person who makes that difference and not miss an opportunity to potentially not help somebody. So for us, so for me, I was distracted a lot, going, oh man, I wish I was out there running calls instead of learning all of this medicine. But the medical side of it was very fascinating, and you have to go through a lot. There's a lot of practical work that you have to do. There's a lot of book work you got to do, and then you got to take a big test that involves practicals as well, and you got to pass that test. Yeah. But with the fire academy, it was definitely more rigorous physically, because we were going into structure collapsed buildings. We were doing hazardous material training. So we had a lot of fun, and there was a lot of interesting exposure to what you might see in the real world, and of course a lot of the firefighters who were running the training center had just so many stories, and so you would learn a lot from them too, and just over time of them telling you what they've seen and what they've done, and so overall I think that physically it was the fire department, and it was more mentally challenged to go through EMT school.
Yeah. Do you have in your mind like a one of the earlier calls that you went on once you got in the mix doing the EMT work? Like, what was the experience of one of your first calls, and what did you take away from that? Like,
absolutely,
when it was real, you were in the real world, you had to deal with a person, all the training was finally done. the person's on the ground having the issue, like what was that emotion like?
Yeah, so that was the very first time that I've ever done CPR on somebody. That was the very first time. Now, I had been trained on CPR for many, many, many years.
But it's different when it's a dummy.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Or if it was, even a little infant doll was acting as that. And so, it was one of those things. I'll never forget just growing up, taking those CPR courses. Baby, are you okay? They always have you say that in the practicals and the training, but in the real world, of course, you're not going to be doing that. But that's what they have you to say, and if you say it, you get your point, you get checked off. And I don't know how they do it now. Again, that was like 20 plus years ago at that point that I had been trained to do CPR, but I had never done it before. And so when I had gotten out of EMT school and I started riding on the squad, and we got a call for, and by that point, again, there had been a few other EMTs on the trucks too. So they had been running some, but I had not been joining them. So the first time that I had joined them was the first time. I actually think it was the first call I got when I was on the flying squad was for a cardiac arrest. And so I remember getting there and walking into the room, and everybody's very quiet. Like, you could tell that the tension is in the room. You just know it as you're walking through somebody's home that you've never been in as well. So it feels different already, and everybody's just standing there. It's usually very, very quiet, except perhaps there's people that are crying. But most of the time, everyone's in a state of shock. And so they're looking at you to be that leader, right? And if it's your first time doing that, you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah. You don't feel it. Yeah.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. So I remember walking into the room and seeing the patient on the ground unresponsive, and there was this like tingle that went up my spine. It was a very surreal moment, and I swear to God I remember that tingle. That was the first and last time I ever felt that tingle, no matter all the rest of the calls, which go way beyond a cardiac arrest that I have seen. I have never gotten that tingle again. That was the first and last time. So it was like just a rite of passage, I think, a moment of recognizing that, okay, this is real now, and you have to do something.
That little bit of fear washing through your body.
Right,
I think
right.
That's what that feeling is
It wasn't in the textbooks anymore. It wasn't talked about. It was actually a real thing. And so, I remember that. I remember that call, and I think that was my first call that I went on as a medic, as a firefighter.
Lord. Yeah, because no more is there a professor standing behind you or like an adult in the room. All of a sudden, you are the adult in the room. And it's like, oh man, like I can't imagine that type of pressure.
And I've been trained on it for so many years. Like, that wasn't the first time that I had done CPR training. And so for me, it was a culmination of many, many, many years of being trained, but never actually seeing it in practice.
Yeah.
So there was just a lot that just like hit you as you walked into that room. But that was.
Was there anything that as you started to do the job for real that you noticed, like the textbook always says X and Y, but it's always A and B,
Absolutely, yeah. So they at least the people that I was working with often would say that there's textbook and then there's street, right? So what you do in the textbook is to get through the class and to get your certification.
Sure.
What's on the street, you throw out the textbook. And I think that a lot over the years, I've heard that from doctors who say the same thing, lawyers who say the same thing, that, you'll study things in these closed universes, but when you get out there, it's really about how to think like a medic and to think like, any other profession that's just is exclusively textbooks. But in the real working world, you have to pivot really quickly. You have to know what you're seeing, put things together. And at the time, a lot of that, I wouldn't say that they were really good at training that type of stuff in the didactic or in the classroom.
Sure.
It was more about kind of preparing you for the exam. And you do have to do practicals while you're in EMT school. But in the practicals, like, I went to medical calls, but I never had done a CPR on anybody. So it was, again, you ride for a short period of time. You don't ride for a very long period of time. So it depends on the calls you get, and it depends on the company that you're riding with, doing your practicals. So, and a lot of that, I didn't see that much in my practicals as much as I would have thought I would have seen, but it just happened to be not that busy, I think, when I did that. But when I started on the flying squad and we were just call after call after call after call, it was just back to back to back to back because they wrote on everything, right? So you have 6 units on the street and you get 2 calls, 2 units are going to go there, but you go to one and then you may get a second one, you go to the second one. So you're seeing 2 different medics and 2 different ambulances on each one. So we would hop a lot of times if those calls came back to back like that. Just we wanted to be as first responding, our first responder as possible.
Gotcha. So would you ever kind of like do-si-do a little bit where it's like if you got there first and then a second unit got there, then another call came in, would you guys go like you and your partner, would you go like, okay, we're going to bounce. You guys got this one. We're going to go to the other one. Or is it usually the first ambulance on the scene is the one that stays and then the second one goes? It
really depended, right? So like if we were in the district that I was in, they would roll another truck. So like if they knew it was a medical call, they would send one fire truck to that location. I was on the flying squad, so we didn't always run if it was one truck, but we would go with them, right? So they would send a truck, and then the flying squad would go with them. And then if another call came out that required us to kind of another medical call that came out, let's say, or even a fire call, because the flying squad still runs on the fire calls as well, because they do extrication. That's how they had all the equipment to do that. But they would come out and then and kind of see where they were with it. So another truck would be perhaps responding to another medical call, but if we were on the squad and we weren't needed anymore, it wasn't something that was there. Once EMS arrived, a lot of what we did was unnecessary because then as the medics got there, they started continuing care and we would pass the care off. Unless we're doing CPR, maybe we'll ride to the hospital with them on the ambulance, which I've done many times, but it depends on how busy and how much availability. If there's another call holding, they may send the flying squad out to do that too. It just depends.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah. It's a whole different thing.
And a lot of that is determined by the control, the company. We call them fire alarm, but they're the people on the other side of the radio that tell us where to go, what to do. Right. So there's the 911 call center, but
there's dispatch.
Exactly. So we would call them fire alarm, and then they would call ours by the units that we were. We never said dispatch, but we always had they were just called fire alarm.
You're lost. That would have been a cool thing to say over the radio. I've always wanted to say that on the radio.
Yeah.
So okay, let's back up a little bit. So walk us through the average shift of being an EMT, right? So first off, there's correct me if I'm wrong. There's 2 shifts, right? There's 12 hours on, right? 12 hours off. So, and what are the hours of the shifts? Is it 3 to 3, 6 to 6?
Yeah. So I should say that I'm not going to say all, but most fire companies are going to be different than the other, right? So like, and it depends by the city. So like, one city may have the fire department and EMS as part of one unit. And so they would essentially, the EMTs would all be firefighters and they would station at the fire station. Okay. And they would roll whenever there were calls that needed to be rolled. Whether or not that station would respond, that was just where you were posted. Because you may have, 12 fire departments, but only 3 ambulances on the street. So like, you don't know where you might be going. If another call, there'll be another firehouse that probably responds to it, depending on where you are. So you can sometimes operate like that, where you are a firefighter and an EMT, and you work for the city as under the fire department. You see that out here in the city. But some cities, like the one that I had worked for, they had separated. So the EMS company was not the fire department, and the fire department was not EMS. They were 2 distinct companies, and the EMS company would roll up to a doctor, a physician who was worked for the city, who was providing what we call medical control, and they would give, it was under their license that we were practicing medicine.
Gotcha.
And so that's kind of how I think how the structure was operated there. So when you see an ambulance that says fire department, like LA Fire Department or New York Fire Department, on their ambulances, that means that they're one unit. But when you see another unit, like let's say, I don't know if this is the case, but like let's say Dallas Fire Department versus Dallas EMS. 2 very different different places. I don't know if Dallas has 2 separate ones, but that's an example of what it was like. So working as a medic and having that shift, it depended on the shift, because as a firefighter, the shifts usually were 24 hours on, 48 hours off. So I'm sorry, 48 hours on, 72. So 2 days on, 2 days off.
Oh, wow.
3 days on, 3 days off. There was a lot of that in the firehouse that I was part of. So people would drive in sometimes from far away to work, but they would work for 2 days and then they would drive home. So they would sleep there at the firehouse and everything. The EMS company that I worked for did 12-hour shifts. So we did not do the 24 hours. But if I was working for a fire department that had their own EMS system, we would be on the 48-hour, 72-hour work week. We were not, so we were on the 12 hours. So I worked night shift from, I think, 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock.
Okay.
And then the day shift would be 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Just to give listeners a little bit of context, the area in which you worked, the city in which you worked, it was a large metropolitan area. It wasn't like a small little town. It was a very large metropolitan area.
Yes,
so.
very, very, very busy. It's one of those cities where we did not have too much downtime. If we were running even night shift, day shift was always pretty much busy, but there were times when the calls were just so back to back that you wouldn't get any breaks, even to eat or take a break. And
I was going to ask, what was the stress level like on an average day of work?
Well, you have to keep in mind though that like the people that do that job, that work as a firefighter and work as a medic, can really compartmentalize and manage their stress well. And in fact, they thrive, I think, in that type of environment. So to outsiders, it looks very stressful, but to insiders, it's like normal. This is great, right? So, at the drop of a dime, we can go from 0 to 100, and we're in our element. Whereas others will, struggle to get to that 100 in the fast period of time to respond. So, I think that it looks to a lot of outsiders like it's a very stressful job, but the reality is that I think as long as you can manage that stress and that becomes a part of your wiring, you're good, and that you're in your element. So I don't feel like there was a lot of stress. There was just what I found to be is just that sometimes you had a lot of pressure because you had a lot of calls. A lot of calls were holding. You didn't always get to prioritize which call you wanted to go on, right? Unless you knew kind of. So the fire alarm, the company that was doing the dispatch, would figure out which call to put you on and everything like that. So it depended on the night. It depended on how busy the city was at the time.
Yeah. So the night shift, was that your choice to work on the night shift, or were you assigned to the night shift?
Yes, I chose to work the night shift. Okay. I was going to school during the day, and I worked at night. So I didn't get much sleep, but that's not unusual.
Yeah.
Hence the coffee.
The coffee, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Now, in your experience, was the night shift busier than the day shift, being an EMT?
I think the night shift was a little bit more fun, and I know that
Define fun.
Yeah, some day shift people may disagree with me, but I think in general, day shift sees a lot more true medical calls, right? Shortness of breath, chest pain,
cardiac arrest,
things like that.
Yeah.
Somewhat some cardiac arrest, but not perhaps as much as you might think. A lot of our cardiac arrests came in the early morning hours when people would wake up and then find their spouse not responding, and so we saw that a lot. But certainly, cardiac arrest could be anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, of course.
I think generally the night shift was a little bit more fun, and I say that because the calls were more interesting, right? So there were more trauma calls, and so a medic is obviously trained in both medical and trauma, right? But I mean, of course, trauma goes under medical, but you know what I mean. Like, so there's assessing what's going on with the patient, trying to determine what medications to provide them and how to get them to the hospital is this medical side I'm speaking of. The trauma side is just basically like making sure that they are packaged and you're getting them to the hospital in the in the quickest that you can so that you can pass them over to.
So trauma trends more towards like catastrophic physical injury,
like blood, right?
Okay, yeah.
So things that were really bloody calls would be obviously more trauma, but car accidents were trauma for sure. But people in offices would have heart attacks, and if we get there in time, like, you know, again, there's a lot of signs and symptoms that show a heart attack, and I think a lot of people, even 20 years ago, were picking up on it and were calling, you know, EMS if there was something that was feeling off. So a lot of times they got those calls. You got to keep in mind too that EMS also is used to transport people from the hospital back home if they can't get a ride, and they're not in a condition to be able to transport themselves. So we would oftentimes take those people from the hospital back home. And then also, some people need ambulances to go to dialysis or to go to other medical calls that they just are not able to do, that require an EMT to facilitate that. Sure. And so you see private EMS companies that will pick up those types of calls, but sometimes the city would roll those as well. It just depends. So the day shift, they were busy with a lot more of those calls than the evening shift because the hospitals were open during the day.
Yeah.
And the doctor's offices and stuff were open during the day, but in the evening, we saw a lot more. We saw a lot more car accidents. We saw a lot more fights. We saw a lot of drinking incidents that would happen.
I was going to say, I think most people would assume that the most common thing that the night shift would have over the day shift is overdoses, right? Whether it's drugs, alcohol, whatever.
You would see that, yeah. Shootings were very
Sure.
heavy into the night and to do that. So,
yeah. What was the absolute wildest call that you can remember, like walking into, where you're just, when you walk into the scene, you're just like, what is going on?
Yeah.
What happened here?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. And I think anybody who's listening as a medic or firefighter would be wondering what I'm going to say, because it's going to be different than probably what they would say.
They have their own
it depends,
answers,
right?
Yeah.
It really does depend. It depends on, are you talking about like the bloodiest call, or you're talking about the one that like really just confused me as to what exactly
I'd go more bizarre,
Yeah, I was thinking confusing, like what happened here?
Yeah, okay, so you're looking for more like shock, because I have to say, like, what I was implying was like getting onto a call and their only complaint was that they didn't feel right.
Wow.
And you know, you would hook them up to the monitor, you would look at it and try to understand. You're on the call, you know, you're on the phone perhaps with the hospital and the ER, and we're just trying things and we don't know what we're going to push, right? Even a cardiac arrest, you have your first line drugs that you're going to go through, and sometimes you know, they're not responding, and you don't really necessarily want to say, okay, why are we doing this? Why are we going to give all this out? Because you may get to one. I mean, you know, when there was a call that we had been on where I wasn't the medic on this call, I was responding as a firefighter, but they were pushing all the drugs that they were, and when they got to pushing the dextrose, that was the one that responded to the patient, and that's not necessarily a drug that you would think would be the one that you respond to. Everyone responds to, you know, epinephrine as you push, so you can stimulate the heart and get into a shockable rhythm. But there's drugs that are in your first line that you sometimes never get to. And it's not until you start to use them do you start to realize, oh, that's why I saw that symptom. That makes sense now why that worked.
Right.
But at the time, you had no idea that this person was a diabetic like that, or had
that's what I was going to say. That
had
sounds
issues,
like diabetes.
And so for me, it was an exposure to that type of, you know, really having to think, what is the problem here? But then there's other ones that are really bizarre too, that, you know, you're not sure. Like, there were calls where, you know, there was a homicide, you know, a bad smell coming from a house, and then, you know, the fire department would get there and realize that nobody was home, and the landlord perhaps was trying to get in, or they were trying to reach the landlord to get in. And you knew kind of like something was wrong. The smell was awful. It was obviously a dead body that was in there. And so you would, if you could, breach and get inside. Once you get inside, you know, you have to be very careful not to disturb a crime scene if it is a crime scene, or if it's a natural death, you're not sure. But you have to go in there and assess the situation. So, you know, there was a call before about that was a homicide, and it looked like they were executed because of the way that there was definitely shot.
Yeah.
But they were shot in the back of the head. And so it wasn't like it was, you know, it didn't seem to us like there was a a conflict that led to a shooting, like you would see just a normal disturbance, but that this was someone who entered the place. We're
very intentional.
Exactly.
It was an execution, essentially.
Yeah. Exactly, right. And so, you're putting that together in your head as you're walking in, and it extends beyond your training because you don't want to disturb the scene, but you're also trying to put it together. How did this person get to this situation? And there was another call too. A friend of mine had been on this call. I didn't go on this one, but it was a car accident. We got out there and we couldn't find the driver. We saw somebody who was dead on the side of the road. Looked like they were hit by a car, and then we couldn't find where the driver was. We didn't think this was the driver. There was nothing to indicate, I think, that it was. Now, again, I didn't go on this call. This is all what I was told. But they found another person in the woods that had a gunshot.
Oh, wow.
And it looked like they shot themselves. And so all the story then...
Genuine mystery.
Yeah. All the story ended up coming together. It was a tragic story, but it all came together that this person was driving with their friend. They broke down, and as they broke down, the friend got out to go wave a car down, and a car hit the friend and killed the friend, and drove off. And then the driver, I guess this is all the speculation. The driver must have been so upset, thought it was their fault, took their gun that was in the glove compartment and shot themselves after they walked into the woods.
Wow. Very,
Very, very, very bizarre. But that's one of those calls where, right, like I imagine you're walking on there and you're wondering, okay, how does this work? How does this piece together? It didn't look like anything was wrong, and you're just dead bodies everywhere.
Yeah. Just chaos on the highway.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, but no, like you never walked into like anything that looked like it was straight out of a movie set, where it was just like was this like a satanic cult? Like what? You know what I mean? Like just something where you're just like, what is going on in this room? Like
any
what
fun ones?
here?
I guess we're asking for the fun ones.
No, that's a good question. No, I don't.
Not
remember.
gruesome per se, but just weird. Where you're like, what was this?
Where I remember responding to. This was the first time I responded to a complaint that somebody just wasn't feeling well. And again, sometimes when you have a busy night, you really don't like going on those calls because you have calls holding that are more important, and calls come out, and that sometimes that people just don't feel well and they call it. Which again, that's their decision. But we do roll on a lot of those calls, and sometimes other calls are holding. So there was one that I went on, and it was at a strip club. And this was the first time that I had been to a strip club as a medic on duty to respond to a call like that. I had no idea how many people there or workers there who did not want to be there, because when we walked in and we said, hey, someone called, said they're not feeling well, 10 people came to us and said, I called, I'm not feeling well, I need to go. And none of them, I think, were the callers. So, I think they were just trying to get out of being there. And we were trying to figure out, like, well, then who called? Like
and they wouldn't tell you who actually called.
Yeah, we didn't get the name of anybody who had called, but that's just somebody who wasn't feeling well. And the amount of people that were trying to suggest that they weren't feeling well, that they should go.
I came to this club with a bunch of money.
That would help.
Yeah.
No, I don't have any, and I don't feel so good.
I could imagine that has to be incredibly frustrating. Like you're already amped up because you're like, I'm trying to help somebody, I'm trying to save a life, and like there's all this glitter and like hip hop going on. You're like, can we just hold on, everybody? Can we stop? Oh my god, that's gotta be super frustrating.
Right, on a busy night, that's kind of not the call you want to get. But again, some people may disagree. I mean, I had people who were like, "Oh man, you get to go to a strip club. That's great."
Hey.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is that truly like? I mean, what is that feeling like when you get the call and you roll out on that call and you go in and let's not mince words. You save someone. You literally save their life. What is that feeling like? Is it like a drug-induced high? Does that fade after a while? What is that feeling like when you do that?
Yeah, not so much for me, and I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I know that for me it was not as much of a high as you might think.
Sure.
It was you doing your job. It was you being trained to do this, and they responded in a way that you expected them to respond. So you're going down your first line drugs. You're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing right, and then if you bring them back, or you're able to package them and get them out. Because remember, saving lives isn't just bringing somebody back from the dead, but also preventing them from dying. So,
right.
When we had some terrible car accidents where like a rollover and trying to get someone out of the car. I remember there was a rollover and we tried to get the spine board in. This person was sitting upright, but the car was upside down. So they were upside down in the car, but the car was upside down. So they were kind of upright, right? Sitting upright.
Oh, so their head was like in the floorboards of the car.
Yeah, but they were sitting like how you're sitting now. And so we tried to get them in. And they kept on saying there was such a pain in the back, in his back. And so we tried to get the spine board, right? So we're not gonna we C-collared him and everything. We tried to get the spine board. We slide it behind him, and then maybe slide him up on the board. We do everything we can, right, to try to protect the neck and the spine and the back for a rollover, especially. But we couldn't get the spine board out. I remember it was like clunk, clunk, clunk. We couldn't get it down.
Oh, no.
And it turned out he was impaled by part of the vehicle, right?
Yeah.
And so
I knew that was coming.
yeah. So it was very difficult. I remember when we had to lift him out because there was no way to get to cut the rod that was inside and to try to get it. It was very thick. And I remember when we pulled him out, his kidney had fallen out, and we just picked it up and we put it back in.
Yeah,
I mean,
there you
that's
go.
just what you got to do,
Right,
right?
again.
Like you're just packaging at this point, trying to get them. But my point is that our goal was to keep him alive.
Right.
And so it's very much like that same feeling of, you're just doing your job, you're doing it right. For me though, the best high that I've felt that I would say for me, it really checked all those buckets was when we would deliver a baby in the back of the unit. That was really cool because, and again, the call it's the call to the ER that's letting them know that you now have 2 patients.
Yeah.
And that feels really good.
That
awesome. Feels really good. Be advised, we now have 2 patients.
So how does that process go in an ambulance? Is it just like the movies where all you need is like a little bit of water and some towels and be prepared to catch?
Yeah, that's certain people. Yeah, if you've had children before, you tend to the births tend to be a little bit easier and quicker. So yeah, it depends. That's one of the first questions we ask is how many children have you had, and there's a lot more questions obviously, but that's one to determine too, like how quick should we be prepared. And oftentimes we try not to deliver babies in the back of the unit. We want to have a sterile environment, and the back of the unit is somewhat sterile, but it's not the ER, it's not the hospital. So,
right, of course.
So we want to obviously do what's in the best interest for the patient, and if we can suggest not to push, that would be best for everybody. Yeah. But sometimes it's happening in that moment, and you just pull over on the side of the road, and that's when you deliver the baby.
It's a boy.
In the back. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like
how many times does that happen to you?
I can't even remember.
Okay.
Yeah, there's so many.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I like that's. I mean, that's incredible to me that you were able to kind of be even killed about it, because it's like when I do well at my job, it's like my company saved a little bit of money, or like the project got done on time. Not I saved somebody's life, right? But that's
kept
amazing.
a human alive.
Well, I might not know the joy of saving someone's life, but I do know the despair of looking at 3 empty glasses.
That is right.
Which we are doing at the moment.
Gotta get some more coffee brewed here in a moment.
We will be back in just a moment with our anonymous EMT guest. Chase, I don't know about you, but it does feel like ever since COVID hit, we spend so much time in our homes, and our homes have kind of become our office, and it's been this kind of weird blend of professional and home. I find that occasionally it is difficult to become creative in the house. Sometimes you got to get out and you got to find a different space to kind of let that creativity fly. And we are excited to share with our listeners that if you are in the LA area, we have the solution for you. We are proudly sponsored by The Muse Rooms, which is a creative co-working space that is here. They have a Hollywood location and they have a Burbank location, 2 convenient locations for you, that is ready to serve all of your creative space needs. If you want to rent space for a day to work on that screenplay, or if you need to rent a conference room for a big meeting that you have with a team that doesn't meet regularly, the Muse Rooms has got you covered. It's a great space. It's a great owner. It's a great vibe too. It's just a really cool, you'll get points with the youngsters for being cool for renting out.
It's the hip spot to be, indeed.
It definitely is. So give the Muse Rooms a check if you're for all of your creative co-working space needs at the Muse, MUSE rooms.com. And now let's move on to part 2 of the show.
Welcome back from the break. We are here with our mystery guest, a former EMT and firefighter in a city maybe near where you were, or where you are now. But our mystery guest was an EMT for many, many years. And one of the things you mentioned was the joy and sometimes turmoil of taking a break while doing that job. Could you describe that experience and what, just what you experienced when you were trying to get any kind of downtime on those shifts?
Yeah, I can't imagine breaks are structured in a job like that.
No, they're not. And that's the thing, right? So if you're really busy and you have a lot of calls holding, you typically don't get that many breaks. Now, that could be very different now, and it can be very different in wherever you are. But in the place where we were, we did not have any kind of like scheduled breaks. We couldn't call the fire alarm company, the dispatch, and get them to say, hey, we're gonna go away for a second. You just had to kind of find the opportunities, right? So if you had to use the bathroom at the hospital where you dropped off your last patient, just try to get that done while your partner's cleaning the back of the unit and prepping it for the next call. Eating is one of those things too, right? Like sometimes it was so busy you didn't get much opportunity to eat. And there's always, at least there was when I was doing it, there was always a running joke of like, whenever you say certain words, you get calls. So if you said I'm hungry, you get a call. I have to use the bathroom, you get a call.
Yeah.
And
Superstitions.
There was enough coincidence that people started going, is there a correlation to this? Right?
Yeah.
Every time I land at the airport, when I decide to finally go to the restroom before the bags come out, as soon as I step into the restroom, that's when the bags all start coming out.
Yeah. Right.
Every time.
Exactly. And you would get, and that's the thing too, you would get people who you worked with who were just shit magnets, as we called them, right? Like, so bad calls just followed them anywhere that you went. And then there were some that were these, cloudless skies that they're so easy. You got all the best calls, or you didn't get any calls. You just happened to be posted in the right area where when a call would come out and the other trucks would take it because you had to have coverage, right? You couldn't just run all your trucks. There was no, let's do one and then we'll give the other person a call on another person and try to even it out. It was just where you were posted. And if you got lucky and you were posted in a place that didn't have a lot of calls that night, you could take a nap if you had the opportunity, maybe a 20-minute nap or a 10-minute nap. But those naps became very valuable because, it taught me how to fall asleep really quickly, right? To try to get into that. Even if it wasn't sleeping, it was just a deep relaxation, trying to just calm the mind, and then the next call would come out and you get your second wind if you're tired. But and again, night shift, so like not everybody was made for the graveyard. I was going to school during the day, so I was tired a lot of the times. But others who worked night shift regularly, this was their norm. This is how it was.
So they were alert and awake the whole time.
Yeah, and it's also kind of funny too to say a little sidebar is that because we were 12-hour shifts, I would come in and I would see the medics leaving who had worked all day, and they were all like, oh, all right, see you tomorrow, and they're just exhausted. And then I would do our night shift, and it would just go by so quickly because you're so busy. And then I would come in and transfer the truck back over to them. And I feel like I saw them an hour or two ago. And they've got wet hair that's combed because they took a shower really quickly to get to work and everything. And I can tell that they're waking up from their sleep and their, because they everything that they had to do at night. And so it's just surreal because everybody would always say good morning. It didn't matter if you worked night shift or day shift. It was always good morning because it was good morning to the night shift who was starting their shift, and it was good morning to the day shift because they were starting their shift in the morning too. So we always had a little running joke that everybody just says good morning.
There is only morning.
There's only good mornings. Yeah.
That's amazing. So so what? So with breaks and stuff like food, like are you kind of strictly limited to like fast food or stuff, or it's like it's not like you can't pop into a Denny's for
they got a microwave in that truck.
Yeah, you could. No, there's no microwave unless you use the paddles. No, I'm kidding. You don't do that.
Some easy toast.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
Quick grilled cheese.
Would that work?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Not with that attitude.
No.
Yeah.
Right. So there were some times, it depends on how busy it was. There were some times when if we were posted in an area that was not busy that night, then you could go into a Denny's if you wanted to. You could order some food. But a lot of times a call would come out while you're waiting for your food. I mean, that happens so often, and you got to leave. Maybe you'll come back and try to pick it up. You'll try to say, I'll make my way back. But sometimes that happens. Sometimes that didn't. If you happen to be lucky enough to get your food, then you're usually eating it on the way to a call. And I've seen some people absolutely perfect driving with their knee as they are eating French fries and sipping on a drink and trying to talk on the radio as they're going to a call.
French fries go in the cup holder. Everybody knows that.
Some of them were just really good at that, and I wasn't always that good. I wouldn't always want to do that, but there were times when you have a hamburger in one hand and you're changing the siren as you're going through an intersection. Trying to drive through that while eating. Cold food also, you get used to eating cold food because you got to put it away and come back to it. But I have to say, gas stations. Those are some really memorable places, because oftentimes the gas stations, you would go there and you get coffee, and some of them would give you free coffee. And I had a theory that the coffee was free because it had been old for like 8 hours.
Right.
So they wanted to get rid of it.
Night coffee.
Yeah, they wanted to get rid of it. But as long as the caffeine was there, that worked for us.
Yep.
And some of it was sludge, and some people liked it. Some people really hated it.
Motor oil.
Yep, exactly. And so we were oftentimes would meet certain people up there. Like if we happened to cross another unit that was going to a different location, they may go into the same 7-Eleven that we did, and we could say hi and have a cup of coffee before they go to their next call or we go to ours. And I've worked with some wild personalities too. Some people got really angry when they get a call in the middle of their coffee. Like got really upset and starts
I can feel that.
cursing.
I feel that.
Yeah. And I mean, but then again, we're talking about people who've been doing it for a long time, and I would say this particular person was pretty burnt out.
Yeah.
And that happens.
Is there? I mean, what are the signs that you can tell someone's kind of burning out on the job?
That depends on the personality, I think. It depends on how often they want to talk about war stories, how often they don't want to talk about war stories, and how much tolerance they have with their bedside manner. Because you're going to be seeing lots of patients, lots of different personalities, and you have to maintain a good bedside manner. The people who are most burnt out, I think, are the ones who have the less tolerance too. And they may just be a little bit more sharper with the others, a little bit more snippy with some of the patients, because you hear sometimes the same thing and it does get annoying. But that's just the kind of the nature of the calls. So it really does. It really depends. Some medics who are really burnt out really despise going on shootings because of how much work goes into it. So they perhaps get really frustrated and angry as they're going to that call. But then when they get there, it kicks in and they do their job. But
they get it done.
But it certainly isn't something they want to do. And that's, I think, some ways to tell is that they've been doing it for a long time, obviously, but how well they manage their own emotions during those calls and things, and the way they deal with some patients who are quite difficult sometimes to deal with.
I'm gonna ask, what do you do with a resistant patient? Like how much room do they get before you just strap them to the gurney and say, we're going on a ride?
Yeah, you certainly try to talk them down. And a lot of times too, I mean, like, a lot of times any patient who's going to be, and again, this is when I was working, any patient who looked like they were going to be violent. So anyone who was drunk, anybody who was fighting, or anybody who perhaps you felt like there may have been a flight risk, police were there, So oftentimes, if it really got out of hand, the police would step in and try to use some authority. But the truth is, oftentimes, medics are the person that tries to talk the patient into sitting down, relaxing. Look, we're gonna help you. Right? We're not here to hurt you. They're afraid. Some of them are afraid of the police if they're really drunk and they're belligerent. And when we step in, we ask the police to leave the back of the ambulance and to walk away, and that gives us a little bit more of credentials to calm them down, keep them from getting too wild and resistant, right? So that's oftentimes kind of the best way to do it, is to try to just level with them, let them know that you're there to help them, and most of the time that works. It sometimes doesn't, and that's when it gets violent, right? I've definitely had many people take swings at me. Some of them have connected.
While you're trying to help them or save their life.
Oh, yeah. There was a patient that we went, I remember this one, and anybody who worked with me would remember this call too, because I think this was talked about pretty well. We got a call that somebody was unresponsive, and it was really early in the morning, but I mean, not really. I'm sorry. It was early. It was towards the end of the shift. So it was early morning, but it wasn't like 3 a.m. It was like maybe like 6 a.m. And it was the last call that we were going on. And sometimes that's really frustrating because you work all night. And then if you get that last call before your shift ends, you have to work extra into that, because you have to take the patient.
Right, of course.
And that can take anywhere between a 45-minute call or an hour and a half, depending on the extent of the injuries or
It's like
or
that
what
person
it is.
that walks in the restaurant at 5 minutes before closing.
Oh yeah,
and everybody's
You're
stuck.
like,
Right. So we got stuck. But there was this call. Yeah, it was unresponsive. We didn't really know what we were going to because somebody, I guess a jogger, may have called and said somebody was outside of their car on the ground. So we get out there and we picked this guy up. He was not responsive, but he was breathing. It was a little shallow breathing, and he had it just seemed like he just was passed out. And so we picked him up. We put him on the back of the ambulance as we were getting in there. I was doing a glucose test to try to see if there was, just we're doing our vitals, our basic vitals.
Yeah.
And I remember I pricked him and I didn't see any blood come out. And I was like, man, that's a little odd. But
That's not
right.
good.
And so I pricked him again, and he started rousing, and he looked over at me and he was like, "You motherfucker." And his foot just connected with my head. It connected. I saw stars.
Oh no.
And I dropped everything, and I grabbed his foot, and his other foot whittled away and kicked me in the side. And so I grabbed both feet, and I was able to get a hold of it. My partner jumps on top of him to try to hold him down, and he starts to bite my partner. And
It is a vampire.
Yeah,
so
zombies.
I remember kicking in a call to get everybody down there. And when you kick in a call like that, they basically bring the whole world down on you. And I didn't really feel like I should have done that, but it was a panicked moment of like, I was seeing stars. I didn't know what was happening. My partner was screaming that he was getting bitten. And so I kicked in we call the 108. And I mean, detectives were showing up who woke up because they were around the corner and jumped in their car and came over.
Got the whole station down there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I remember. I feel like I remember hearing a helicopter that was flying over. Like everyone just comes in. Everyone just comes in.
But did the guy have any blood? That's what I want to know.
Oh, well, I was booted out of the unit when the police came in because it was there, like, right. So if we're going to help all the time, right? We're going to help to restrain, but like everyone came in, and this guy had just so much strength, right? Wow. This guy was definitely on a narcotic.
Something going on.
And he was coming down from that as we woke him up. I mean, it was the prick, I think, that his finger that like roused him. And then he hit that adrenaline rush, and he was all over the place. But and again, this is not the first. It wasn't the last. It was just this sometimes happens.
Of course, yeah. So let me ask you this: there's good calls, right? In the sense that like you hear it over dispatch, and you're like, we can do this. There's bad calls that like this is tough. What are the calls that are like the annoying calls that you're just like, I don't want to deal with this, right? Because they might not be life-threatening or they're just whatever, but what were the calls that were always like groan-inducing when they would come over dispatch?
Yeah, leg pain, jaw pain.
Leg pain.
Headache. Yeah. Toothache.
Okay.
We've gotten toothaches before. And again, I it's hard for me to remember exactly. Some of them we would either send a sprint truck to, so like the whole unit wouldn't respond. It would just be like a supervisor going over there just to sign an AMA against medical advice to try to like just like you don't need to go to the hospital, and I don't think you do, and as long as you're okay to sign this, like we're gonna let you go. And a lot of times that's what happened. But those are a bit annoying because I remember going on one that just she wasn't feeling well, and we get there. And she was in a fight with her husband. And once we started showing up and the husband was moved out of the room where he was agitating her, she calmed down and everything was fine. So like she was just very agitated and called 911 saying, I don't feel well. I need help. This is all bad. And then it was really just a domestic dispute that we helped by just separating the parties.
You have experience working for... you mentioned earlier there are some cities that have joint fire and EMT departments and other cities that sort of farm stuff out. Are there benefits or drawbacks to either method as far as like a city having both those things combined? And then have you seen any or are aware of any shift in maybe like quality of service or training for more private companies that do the private EMT stuff?
There are EMS companies that, when they're separate from the fire department, that have the 911 contract, and those are the ones that get the 911 calls. So they will be the ones who are on the top of the list. If they're busy, which oftentimes they are in a really busy city, then the private service units are second and third in line to be called for the 911. So those get the overflow calls.
Sure.
And again, they can be sometimes just as busy as the 911 providers. But the quality of care, it's it's hard to say because I've known lots of private service medics who have provided absolute excellent care. And then there are some private service medics who are in private service because they got so burnt out doing 911 that they just much prefer a paycheck and taking home grandmothers from the hospital and dropping them back off home. And then a 911 call comes out and they're just really angry that they have to do that. But I think that the quality of care should be the same. That especially those that are really burnt out, I feel like those are the most experienced ones, and they probably know what to do. It's just they've just got to do it. They may not do it with a smile, but they're still going to do it, and that's where your partner also is helpful too. Like if you can help do what needs to be done and just focus on helping your partner out. That's another big thing. There's a lot of camaraderie that goes into that fire department and EMS, and that's one of the things I have to say though is the most thing that I miss. That I miss the most is the camaraderie, because you go through these types of experiences together, and it could change on a moment's notice, and you got to pivot. It could become extremely dangerous, and you have to depend on the person you're with. And again, all of you have very much that same kind of personality, that is to run towards the problem, then run away. So when your partner's in trouble, you expect you are going to go and help them. And if you're in trouble, you're going to expect your partner to come and help you. And I have never been in a situation where I have was let down by my partner or fire department not doing their job. There have definitely been some times where police may have been able to step it up a little bit, but I think that's certainly not everybody.
We'll save the discussion on the police forces of the nation. And
I
think that could be its whole own show.
It's a shame too, because I would imagine that you have, your partners, and I imagine that's a very strong bond. There's like a lot of buddy cop movies, but there's not like hardly any like buddy EMT movies, and there really should be, because I imagine that bond is just as strong.
It is, yeah. The camaraderie is a real thing, and even going out and drinking with your your partners, or even like
after the shift,
right. So we had. So if we finished our shift and we had 6 units that were working night shift, all the 6 units, right? So the 12 of us may go out, get some food. We've definitely done that, and we bond and we talk about some of the calls maybe, or go through some war stories, but just have fun, right? And I have to say, we've sometimes been the loudest people in a restaurant after a shift, because we're just, I don't know, we've just got this energy that, when we're all together and we're enjoying each other's company, you just really are close to them. Yeah. And the camaraderie is very real.
I would imagine even on a small level, after every single shift, you would sort of have a renewed perspective and like a zest for life. Like, you've seen all these injuries and all this tragedy and all this like quote unquote horror for an evening. Once you're finally off that hook and get to relax a little, I would imagine there's, I don't know, a reinvigoration, just one, to just be done, and two, to like sort of celebrate your life and celebrate existence. Do you think anybody was ever consciously thinking of that, or is it just
honestly no? I don't think so. I think that a lot of us this is just the day in the life of a medic, and that's just the job that you do. We're going to see the same thing the next day and the next day, and so it's just, at this point, it's really about bonding with the people that you work with, and again, complaining about some patients. I mean, like I remember hearing from somebody who works at a hair salon. She had said that a lot of people, will tell you personal things. Like, it's kind of understood that people are going to do that. And the question is, do you keep those personal? Like, do you not talk about that?
Right.
And she was like, everyone in there knows about all your personal stories, no matter how much you say, this is a personal thing. All the other hairstylists eventually will hear about it. Oh, let me tell you about what my client told me.
They're not therapists or lawyers.
Right.
Like, they don't have any obligation.
There's no confidentiality that comes with that. And so anyway, that's what she was telling me. And I say that obviously there's confidentiality with being a medic, but when you're around other colleagues, oftentimes to help you decompress is to complain about some of the patients that you had, turn it into maybe a little bit of a joke in a way.
Yeah.
Because that definitely, like I said, helps to decompress and to bring you down and to, bring you back more to a human, because you are really the type of person like you have to compartmentalize so much that those little moments that you have with people to bond on a funny call or something or turn a call into something that's funny really helps.
Well, look, here's the thing. I mean, complaining about customers to coworkers,
that's universal,
is a universal human right. So it doesn't really matter if what the job is. I mean, that's a standard thing. Let me ask you, do you think that on the whole, do you think that the job has a shelf life?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. So when I got into fire department and EMS, I had been told by several people that, you either burn out really quickly or you have this you have this career where then you start to do a slow burn, right? And I've seen both. The biggest thing that I think gets in the way of a medic in a career is injuries to their back. Because you're lifting so many patients, you're crawling into cars that have been flipped over. I remember there was a car that had driven into a canal, and we had to jump into the canal to get into the car to get the patient out as the car was sinking in the water.
You're also now water rescue.
And so, for sure. And so we were doing everything we could do there, but that taxes the body. When a car is upside down, the windows are typically broken and glass is everywhere. And even wearing long sleeve shirts, you're going to get glass in your elbows, on your arms, and on your wrists. And I've heard some medics twistingly say, that feels good. Yeah. I didn't like it. I didn't like that feeling, but it was a feeling of like, well, you worked, you did your job.
Yeah.
So there's going to be things in the job that definitely take down the shelf life of a medic and a firefighter, and a lot of that I think has to do just with the rigors of lifting. Because if your back only has a certain number of years, of doing stuff like that too, and you oftentimes you want to call the fire department to help with lifting so that you don't have to do that. Things may be very different now, I have to say. I don't know how it is exactly now, but there certainly were medics that I knew that lasted only 3 to 5 years because they would blow their back out and just could not lift. And maybe they would work in the office while they were healing, but yeah, that was one of the things.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear you say physically. I guess I'm not shocked, but I guess I would have assumed, there's a phenomenon, right, that has been discussed before with an EMT. It's called the Grim Reaper phase, right, where it's this kind of phase. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is the Grim Reaper phase real? I would have assumed that was more of a cause for burnout than anything else. But is that Grim Reaper phase, is that real? Does that happen?
Yeah, I think it goes by different names. I've heard it from different people in different ways and experience it different. I think what you're trying to refer to, I think, is that the idea that you start to become very disillusioned with the way that you're doing your job. Which is to say that if a patient dies on your shift, and then the next patient you get dies, and then the next patient you get dies.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
It's just a realistic example of confirmation bias is what it is.
Yeah, you start to get that feeling that like I'm doing this to them. Like maybe I'm the one who's touching them. Maybe what I'm doing isn't doing it. And again, that happens over time. It's not something that is like immediate. It's something that comes typically with a burnout, and you start to see things. And again, it's not. Everyone goes through it probably differently and how they feel it. Sometimes they leave the profession. Other times you get through that. Other times it just pops its head up a little bit and then goes away, and then pops it up again and goes away. It really just depends. You have to know that you did the job at the best that you could do. There was a great movie called Bringing Out the Dead that brought that
the Martin
to light.
Scorsese film.
Yeah, that brought that to light. Like, everybody he touched was dying, and Nicolas Cage's character was happy. I remember there was a scene where where his partner wanted to go to a call, and Nicolas Cage's character was fighting him on it, saying, "No, I don't want to go to this call. Don't do it, Larry." And then another call comes out, and it's a homeless person that just wants to go to the hospital to get a shower and food. And Nicolas Cage's character was just so happy, even though this person smelled so bad that they couldn't do it, and was a frequent flyer going back and forth to the hospital every night. And all the real medics,
is that what they call people who?
Yeah, they'll get frequent flyers, but but a lot of medics, like I said before, and from the beginning, really want to go on the good calls because they want to make a difference. And so when you get these calls that are just a little bit more annoying, you tend not to really be as interested in it, right? You want to do it really quickly, or maybe tell them that you really don't have anything wrong there. Why do you want to go to the hospital? What's really, and kind of see if they can maybe go on their own or have a family member take them to keep everything very efficient and running. But in Nicolas Cage's character loved those calls because they weren't going to die on him.
Right.
And so it manifests itself, I think, in different ways. I think everybody, I would think that everybody at one point or another, if you've worked long enough, have felt it. And again, it comes in different varieties. But yes, that certainly can weigh down on people, especially when you're getting really burnt out with the calls and you're working a lot, and it's a lot of the same calls and a lot of high intensity calls.
Did they ever offer any resources to anybody that was dealing with that? Like, did they have therapists on staff at all, or it was just kind of we'll hire new people?
Yeah, not really on staff.
Okay.
Again, when I was working, it wasn't as I wasn't familiar with anyone that would do it. You've got your insurance, of course, but there was no one on staff that would do it. That could be very different now. There's a lot of differences now. Like one of the things that I know is different. They low jack the unit like a Big Brother kind of way, where it knows how fast you're going, because you're not supposed to go more than I can't remember now, like more than 10 miles or something over the speed limit, or 15. I don't know what it is, but
you don't just get free reign when those lights are on.
Yeah, we used to. When I did it, there was no Big Brother. It was just coming in, and so it would track how fast you were going on a call, and if you were going fast, or if you put the lights on when a call was there. So like it tracked all of that information so that it can make sure that you weren't abusing it. I imagine that's where it came from, is that there was a lot of abuse in other companies. I don't remember.
People were rushing back to Denny's to get that meal, right?
Yeah, exactly. yeah. I never witnessed any abuse of it, but I'm sure that that's what triggered it and caused it. And so they were low jacking the units. Even if you stopped really quickly, it would log that too. And you would get dinged, and you had a certain number of dings on your record that could get you in trouble. And I left right at that time. But I also did leave at the time. That would have made it a little bit easier, because they were installing mapping systems that they would send the calls, and it would go into your computer that you would see there.
Oh, nice.
When I was there were no computers. We just had radios and a map book.
Yeah.
And we had to learn the area. We knew the area like the back of our hand, and we would learn all about it. And going to it and doing it over and over again, you just knew all the hospitals, where they were, how to get there fast. There's times when you push it, pedal to the metal. Pediatric emergencies were always ones where I know people were definitely gunning it.
And got a little heavier when there was a kid involved.
Yeah, and police would also escort you sometimes. If they knew that you were going to the hospital with a pediatric emergency, they would escort and block traffic and try to give you a full stretch.
Yeah, how friendly was the PD in general with the EMTs?
Yeah, they certainly were.
Yeah.
I mean, like you definitely relied on them and counted on them, but there were some times where they were a little slow to respond. And again, I'm talking about the bad things. There were lots of good things. They helped out and assisted. They kept crowd control. That's oftentimes one of the more difficult things. But when somebody who's a police officer is there, the crowd tends to be a little bit more tame and controlled. But ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody works together, and you become very good friends with some of the police that you see over and over and over again on the calls. Yeah. And then you sometimes hear about the things that they have to deal with, and you trauma bond with them, and you try to let them speak and let them tell you about it, and it calms down some of that. I know lots of police who I think really could have benefited from having people that they could just kind of like decompress with, that we got to do.
Sure.
That maybe didn't do it for whatever reason. Maybe the police department over there at the time was not as good with it, but the more that you see
They're also
trauma,
sort of different clubs as far as
like,
culture.
Yeah. The more that you see that kind of trauma, and the more that you have to deal with that type that police have to deal with, I think that could burn you out, put you in a very different place a lot quicker than it is with medic, because no one's happy to see a medic. I got to say, no one's happy to see a medic, because it means bad news is there. But oftentimes they rely on you, right? But I think a lot of people are not happy to see police show up.
Most anybody is probably
because
unless you're the one that called them.
Yeah, because if you see
Right.
a police officer, it probably means you were in trouble, right? Or
Something, whatever.
Yeah, something's wrong, and there needs to be. And again, I feel for them as well because they have to manage all of that and do that, and so their resources I think are a little bit more wide when it comes to like having people to talk to and having social services that can give them an outlet to decompress. But for us, like we really did rely on a lot with each other, and that's what built the bonds that I think still exist today.
Yeah. I mean, you call them war stories. It's like going into battle with someone. Like
Sure. Yeah.
Building that kinship.
Scars, war stories, all that stuff.
Well, as we kind of start to wind down here, one of the questions that I think is really important that I wanted to get on the record is for everybody listening, what is the best advice that we can pass along if you are ever in a situation where EMT is called or you need to call EMT and EMT arrives? What should people know that how can they help EMTs do their job more effectively? What should people do and not do in those situations?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it really does depend on the call, and it depends on the patient that you're dealing with and the people that are around you. I think most people respond pretty well to supporting the EMS and fire department when needed. Certainly, we're resources, so we've got our resources too. We can call more EMS and more fire department if we need some. But I'm going to say a couple of things that you may not think about that we find delays us a little bit.
Yeah.
Having identification and insurance cards ready for us make a real big difference because, obviously for life-threatening emergencies, we're not going to be, spending time trying to get all of that information. But we are required as part of the job to fill out paperwork, and that paperwork requires that we have information on you. And so if we're just scooping you up and running off to the hospital and we don't get that information, then it becomes very difficult for the hospital and we can get in trouble with our bosses, right? Because our job is to document, and that's for legal reasons too. So we need to have documentation like that. And a lot of times we're searching for it. We're asking for where it is. So for anybody who calls 911 who thinks that they're going to be going to the hospital, have that information ready so that care and everything that needs to be done can be done quicker. I don't think, like I said, I don't think it's going to affect your care, but it's going to make the medic less concerned that they're not doing everything that they're supposed to do.
Sure.
It's one less thing that doesn't need to be on your list.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Because documentation, like I said, is critical for legal reasons in particular. So, it's going to be on their mind if they don't have it, and you don't want anything getting in the way or potentially distracting them like that. So that's one thing. The other thing too is giving them space, and a lot of times I think people do. But if you're going to call EMS and you have a difficult place where the patient is, try to do your best to make as much room for them to come in because oftentimes I think
very practical.
Oftentimes I think people don't think that we have to bring a stretcher and all of our items and everything up there. And if someone isn't waiting outside to flag us down, how are we going to get to where we get to, right? Maybe we have an apartment number, but if people aren't on the side of the street flagging us down, it's going to delay us even more. So it's always good to have the crowd kind of controlled, backed away, give us the space that we need, but give us also the path for us to get to where we need to get to and out as soon as we can. The quicker, the better is always that. I think those are the two big things that I would say. And I know that's kind of unconventional. People may not think about that, but
that's why you're here, dude. I mean, that's great advice because that's not obvious, right? So thank you for sharing. Man.
Number one tip is don't get hurt and stay healthy.
That's
the easiest way if you never want to
try to live a lifestyle that doesn't involve calling EMS regularly, but yeah.
So if someone wanted to try and get involved in the emergency medical service, where's a great place for them to start? And is there any advice you might give them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that if people, I feel like know whether or not they want to do it and they know that they're that type of personality that would run into a problem versus running away or freezing, and so
fight or flight's a real thing.
You've got that. It's very real. Yeah. It's absolutely very real. And so I would, so anybody who wants to do that, if you want to be exposed to it, but again, I really honestly think it gets competitive to get into the fire department. I was fortunate to have a volunteer fire company in the city that worked. So there was a paid group of firefighters, but also they just didn't have the money to have a full service fire department. So they had to rely on volunteers. That got me in. But the big service companies that you see today in the big cities, like let's say Los Angeles, that's very competitive to get in. And you have to start applying early on. It's like trying to get into grad school. You know, you got to do it maybe a year before and try to get on the list. They only take a certain number of people. You have to be qualified. You have to have your recommendations, I imagine, in order and be at a certain physically fit level and probably an age as well. So, you know, that is something that looks more towards career oriented rather than just kind of like what I was doing, where I was volunteering. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that I could do this job and I enjoyed it and I can do it well, obviously. But I, you know, was fortunate to have the option of, you know, joining it and kind of seeing where it would take me versus having to go, all right, this is a career and I'm going to spend all of this time and energy doing it. So for the fire department, it's definitely looking up, you know, what your local fire department is expecting and what they're going for. But so if you're looking for EMS, you know, any community college, I think, or not any, but, you know, community college is what I went to, and they provide you with the degrees. It's not a 4-year degree, so I don't think a lot of universities have it, but they might to get the certification and the license. But ultimately, you know, you got to go to school for it. It's easier to break into as an EMT than it is a firefighter if the fire department is competitive. EMS companies are, I think, less competitive than the fire department companies. There are a lot of companies that will hire you as a medic, but for fire department, you might have to do a lot more work depending on the company. But yes, that's kind of what I would say, is that you would look at schools to get your certification, get everything, pass all your certification, and get your registry license. Then you can work as a medic, and then maybe as a medic you have exposure to the fire department. And if you think you like doing that too, you could leverage perhaps your experience as a medic to join the fire department, and that might put you ahead of others. But again, it depends on the city. Some are really competitive. Los Angeles is one of those, very competitive.
Plus, there's the sexy mystique of the firefighter these days.
I know.
That's become a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mustache. You know, you can't have a full beard, right? So you can only have like this full Manchu.
Yeah, the mustache, right?
So
it's got to fit under the oxygen mask, right?
Exactly. You need a seal. So that's there's more stories if I had time about being a firefighter, but that's more about as a medic.
We'll have to bring you back.
That just sounds like we'll have to bring you back. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, you know, insight into a world that obviously people are familiar with, but way fewer people are familiar with the inside of how that world works. So thank you for this. This was fascinating, and I think it was enlightening. So.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've done it, and it brought back some really, really fun memories. And I'm sure I'll be thinking of more things as I'm leaving, and maybe I'll come back on later and share some more of those.
So there you go. That's the moral of the story, folks, is that if you want to get some interesting insight from an EMT or firefighter, buy them a cup or two of cheap, stale coffee.
Yes.
And you'll get the good stuff.
They'll spill all the beans.
Yeah.
That's how we survive.
A tremendous thank you to our mystery guests today. We don't really have any socials we can call out for you. So just remember to always support your local EMTs and medical service providers in whatever community you're in, and the firefighters as well. They do wonderful services for all the cities across the nation, keeping us safe and healthy and not on fire. So that's really wonderful to have.
Indeed. And less important to saving lives, but also as equally as important to us. Please support our show as well.
Exactly.
Give us a follow on Instagram and find us online at The Muserooms.
That's not us.
Sorry, let me try that again. Find our show on Instagram at Tutoring Maximum. That's TWODRINKMAXIMUM.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also a huge thank you to our sponsor, The Muserooms. You can find them for all your co-working and creative space needs. That's themuserooms.com, MUSE for Muse. Thank you so much for listening today.
We'll see you next time. Cheers.